to your earring clay designs. This is going to be the perfect opportunity to show you how to make beautiful beads with a faux glass effect and to give you my best advice on how to work with metal leaf. Hi, I'm Michaela from Learn Polymer Clay and I invite you to dive into the tutorial. I'm working with black polymer clay that I have previously conditioned. I passed through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine, and then I used a beautiful texture plate with lots of spirals to texture the clay. I've pressed it into the clay. I noticed that there were some areas that were not really well textured, so I decided to use the round ball tool to add more interest to the pattern in some areas, but then I had to use the same texture plate, align it again with the textured pattern and try to texture it a bit some areas that I wasn't very happy with. Then I flipped the polymer clay and now we are ready to make a beautiful and colorful pattern on the front of the clay slab. So I'm going to use an interesting stencil with a wavy design, and I'm going to use 3 colors of metal leaf: purple, gold and green. When working with metal leaf, you have to keep in mind that not all metal leaves are the same. Some are more rigid than others, and when you are working, especially when you are working with rigid metal leaf, I recommend you to press it onto the clay on top of the stencil and then try to gently remove the excess, because if not, and I'm telling this from experience, you will have a lot of scrap metal leaf flying around and you might breathe it in, which is not a good thing for your health. So from my experience, I think it's better to press it gently, to press the metal leaf into the clay and then use your fingers to wipe the excess and press it even better into the clay. If you notice tiny pieces flying around, hold your breath and wait for the tiny beads to settle, especially on your tile, and then you can use baby wipes and wipe them off so that you won't stir them into the air again. Another idea would be to use scrap clay and press it into these tiny beads, and the clay will collect them. And now all we have to do is decide which cutters we are going to use to cut out plenty of beads. And I decided to go for a larger round cutter to cut out round pieces, and I am also going to use a smaller round cutter to cut out an opening in the middle of the piece, because I want to make a donut shape for these beads. And in fact, I'm going to keep one small round piece cut out with a smaller cutter, because I intend to make also a pair of minimalist earrings, and I'm going to use one element like this to do so. For the first idea, which is in fact the technique that I use the most in my work, and this is the one that I personally prefer, I'm going to show you how to sandwich the earring posts between two layers of clay, meaning between the back of the bead and a cutout element. So I'm going to cut 2 round elements with a small round camper cutter from a sheet of black polymer clay, passed through the setting number 3 and textured with the same texture plate. And then I'm going to put the longer sticky end through this element, and then I will place the flat end on top of the textured back of the bead, and then you'll just have to use your tools. You can use smoothing tools, the round ball tool, and press this clay backing into the back of the piece, but very gently. You don't want to distort the design, of course. In order to bake these pieces, I am going to bake them on cutters because I don't want to bake them lying flat with the metal leaf against the baking paper. I prefer to bake them braced up, supported by metal cutters. For the second idea, I'm going to use a cutter with an interesting shape, with a beautiful shape, something a little bit like a heart. And for these pieces, I'm going to use resin to attach the earring element. So for the time being, I only had to smooth off the edges, and then I can put them in the oven with the other pieces. I don't have to work on these pieces anymore. And for the third design, which I hope will surprise you a little, because I don't want to show you only things that you might already know. For the third idea, I decided to make this attaching system as an embellishment for the bead. Why not? I am again going to sandwich the earring pod between two layers of clay, but this time I'm going to sandwich it on the front of the bead and make it part of the design, make it a design element of the earring. So I put the earring pod through the bead in the upper part, and then again I'm going to cut a small round element from the textured black polymer clay, and I'm going to put it on top of the earring pod. You'll notice that I'm not using liquid clay, and I'm not using liquid clay because I intend to make this part of the design, and I intend to put resin all over the piece, meaning on top of this element, so everything will so it is going to be trapped inside resin. And then when you are happy with the look of your pieces, you can put them in the oven. I bake my pieces for 45 minutes in the preheated oven. I normally bake my pieces on baking paper because I'm making the front and the back of the beads in the same time. For these beads, I am going to bake them on cutters to support them. I'm also tenting my pieces, meaning I'm putting an aluminum disposable pan on top to protect them from direct heat, especially metal leaf. And then you'll just have to let the clay cool down, and we are ready to apply UV resin for the beautiful faux glass look. I intend to give the donut shape beads a very domed effect. So for these beads, I'm going to apply 2 layers of UV resin, and I'm applying the resin straight out from the bottle. Normally, when possible, I start from the center and I'm applying a little bit of resin, and then I press on the bottle a little bit, squeeze a little bit more resin, and I'm spreading it out with the nozzle of the bottle. I'm very careful not to put too much resin because I don't want to have drippings. For the beads that already have the earring pods attached, I decided to put them on metallic cutters, but I'm not using my best metallic cutters because there is always a risk of damaging your cutters. So I'm using either cutters that I have in double, or cutters that I don't really like, I never use, so even if they get damaged in the process, it's okay for me. If you don't have cutters to spare, I totally understand. You can use a larger piece of scrap clay and put it, press it into your, make a ball, press it into your working table, and then press the earring balls into it. But you have to make sure that the front of the piece is not tilted in any way, because the resin will drip to the sides. And because I have such an intricate design on these beads, I didn't use the heat gun to remove air bubbles, but this is always a good thing to think of, using a heat gun to remove air bubbles. And after applying a generous amount of resin on some of the beads, I would look from the side, I would check if I have all the areas covered with resin. I would apply some more in some areas if needed. I also recommend you to use gloves when working with resin and UV resin, to work in well ventilated areas, and to use rubbing alcohol to clean your tools. And then you'll just have to use an UV lamp and cure the pieces. I'm using a fast curing UV lamp, so I only had to cure the pieces for 2 consecutive minutes. And then I decided to apply a second layer of UV resin on the donut beads to have a beautiful domed effect. And I'm going to use resin to attach the back for the other beads, and I'm going to show you what you should pay attention to when using resin. So for the heart-shaped beads, I think it's a great idea to use resin too, because I think you have large enough beads. You can put a generous amount of resin, and you can make sure that you attach the earrings. Really, you secured it very well. I would put some resin, a little bit of resin on the and then I put it on top of the clay. It's a great idea to use UV resin when you are making beads that you want to look like glass, for faux glass beads, because you will end up truly with a bead that looks like glass from the front and from the back. But for really small beads, like the ones that I intend to use to pair of minimalist earrings, I don't really recommend resin, because the surface is too small. You won't have a good grit to make them. And I cured all the pieces again for 2 consecutive minutes using the fast drying UV lamp. But then when I tested it on the smaller minimalist earrings, it was very easy to take it off. Thank you for watching the tutorial, and stay tuned for more inspiration for work with polymer clay.